Her husband Marcus stormed through the door, his face twisted with frustration after another failed job interview, ready to unleash his anger on the woman he thought was just his unemployed wife playing with paperwork. Little did Marcus know, he was about to insult the CEO of the very company that had been rejecting his applications. The soft glow of Elena's laptop illuminated her focused face as she worked late into the evening, rain pattering steadily against the home office windows. At 34, she looked younger than her years, except for the thin scar running along her left temple, a souvenir from her 3 tours in Iraq as a marine logistics officer. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore comfortable jeans and an old Marine Corps t-shirt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The kind of casual outfit that made her look like any other work-from-home spouse. The house was quiet except for the occasional rumble of thunder outside their suburban Denver neighborhood. Elena's desk was organized with military precision. Laptop, coffee mug, bearing the Marine Corps emblem, a small American flag, and a framed photo of her unit from Fallujah. Behind her on the bookshelf sat her Purple Heart in a place of honor, though most visitors never noticed it among the business books and family photos. Next to it, almost hidden behind a plant, was a framed Forbes article titled, 40 Under 40 Tech Entrepreneurs Changing America, but the article's subject matter remained Elena's closely guarded secret. She was reviewing the final numbers for Vanguard Tech Solutions' most successful quarter yet, the cybersecurity company she'd built from nothing over the past 6 years. What had started as a small veteran-owned startup operating from their spare bedroom was now a $50 million enterprise with 200 employees across 3 states and government contracts that would make Fortune 500 companies weep with envy. The Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and 12 federal agencies trusted Vanguard Tech with their most sensitive digital infrastructure. Elena had learned early that being underestimated was often an advantage. In the Marines, her fellow officers initially saw a quiet logistics specialist, not realizing she had a master's degree in computer science from MIT and an almost supernatural ability to see patterns others missed. In Iraq, while others focused on the obvious threats, Elena was the one who identified the supply chain vulnerabilities that were getting convoys ambushed. She'd saved countless lives by tracking seemingly unrelated data points that revealed insurgent attack patterns. The IED that earned her the Purple Heart had also ended her military career, but it gave her something else, absolute clarity about what she wanted to build in civilian life. While recovering at Walter Reed, she'd started coding again, developing security protocols that caught the attention of a Defense Department contractor. Her first government contract was worth $100,000 more money than she'd ever seen. One thing led to another, and Vanguard Tech was born. Her marriage to Marcus had started strong 5 years ago. He was charming, ambitious, working in corporate sales for a mid-tier tech company, while she built her empire from their spare bedroom. But as Vanguard Tech grew, and Marcus's career stagnated, something fundamental had shifted. The man who once bragged about his brilliant wife now seemed increasingly resentful of her success, especially since she deliberately kept a low profile about being the company's founder and CEO. To most people, including Marcus's colleagues and friends, Elena Vasquez was just Marcus's quiet wife who worked from home doing something with computers. She preferred it that way. It made business negotiations more interesting when corporate executives assumed she was someone's assistant, rather than the person who could approve or kill their multi-million-dollar contract. Her LinkedIn profile simply listed her as cybersecurity consultant, and she attended industry events as a representative of Vanguard Tech rather than identifying herself as its founder. The evening had started like many other. Elena worked late, reviewing proposals for a new contract worth $15 million to secure the digital infrastructure of 3 major military bases. Vanguard Tech had become the go-to cybersecurity firm for federal agencies. But Elena still personally reviewed every major deal. Her military training had taught her that details matter. The small things you miss are what get people killed, whether in a convoy in Fallujah or a corporate boardroom in Denver. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Marcus, but she'd been in back-to-back video conferences with clients in different time zones. The last call had been with a Pentagon official discussing a classified contract that would add another $25 million to Vanguard Tech's revenue. Running a company meant being available when national security needed you, not when it was convenient. The coffee in her Marine Corps mug had long gone cold, and she made a mental note to grab dinner after finishing the quarterly reports that showed Vanguard Tech had just become one of the fastest-growing veteran-owned businesses in America. Outside, the spring thunderstorm had intensified, the kind of weather that made staying inside feel cozy rather than confining. Elena actually enjoyed these quiet evening work sessions. After years of managing troops in combat zones and now overseeing a company that employed dozens of fellow veterans, sitting peacefully in her own home office felt like a luxury she never took for granted. The house reflected their comfortable upper-middle-class life, mortgage paid off 2 years early. Elena had insisted on that. Tasteful furniture, a 2-car garage where her practical Honda Civic sat next to Marcus's flashy BMW Leaf. To their neighbors, they looked like a successful professional couple. Most people assumed Marcus was the primary breadwinner. He certainly didn't correct that impression when neighbors complimented him on providing so well for his family. What their neighbors didn't know was that Elena's computer work generated more revenue in a month than Marcus made in a year. The modest Honda in their driveway was a deliberate choice. Elena had learned in the military that drawing unnecessary attention was rarely smart. The woman who could afford any car she wanted chose reliability over flash, substance over style. The front door slammed with unnecessary force, followed by the sound of keys hitting the kitchen counter harder than needed. Elena glanced at the clock. Marcus was later than usual, and the aggressive sounds suggested another unsuccessful day in his 3-month job search. She'd been tracking his applications through her industry contacts, a courtesy he didn't know she extended. What he also didn't know was that 2 of the companies that had rejected him were Vanguard Tech clients, and their HR departments had mentioned his interviews to Elena during routine business calls. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, accompanied by muttered curses that grew louder as they approached her office. Elena saved her work and closed the laptop. She'd learned to recognize the signs when Marcus came home in one of his moods. Tonight felt different though, more volatile than his usual post-rejection funk. Elena, Marcus's voice boomed from the hallway, sharp with frustration and something that sounded dangerously close to rage. "We need to talk now." She could hear him pacing in the living room, his expensive dress shoes clicking against the hardwood floor like an agitated metronome. Through the office doorway, she caught glimpses of him loosening his tie with jerky, angry movement. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and even from a distance, she could sense the barely contained fury radiating from him. Elena's military instincts automatically cataloged the situation: elevated stress, aggressive body language, tone suggesting impending confrontation. She'd seen this pattern before in combat zones, the moment when frustration and desperation combined into something unpredictable and potentially dangerous. What Marcus didn't know was that his wife had spent years diffusing much more dangerous situations than an angry spouse having a career crisis. But as she stood up from her desk and straightened her shoulders, Elena had no idea that the next 10 minutes would destroy their marriage and Marcus's career prospects in the tech industry forever. Elena walked calmly into the living room, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Marcus stood near the window, his silhouette dark against the storm outside, shoulders rigid with barely controlled anger. His expensive suit, the one he'd bought with his last commission check 6 months ago, was wrinkled from a day of unsuccessful interview. The contrast was stark: Elena in her casual clothes, completely at ease in her own home, while Marcus looked like a man fighting a war he was already losing. "Rough day?" she asked quietly, settling into the armchair across from where he stood. Her voice carried the same calm tone she'd used to brief commanding officers in Iraq: steady, professional, designed to de-escalate rather than provoke. Years of managing crisis situations had taught her that the first response often determined whether a situation exploded or resolved peacefully. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus turned to face her, and Elena could see the frustration etched in every line of his face. His usually meticulously styled hair was disheveled, his tie loosened in a way that suggested he'd been tugging at it all day. But it was his eyes that concerned her most. They held a wild, desperate quality she'd never seen before, the look of a man who felt his world slipping away and needed someone to blame. "Rough day," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's what you're going with. Rough day." He began pacing again, his movements sharp and agitated. "Elena, I've been out there for 3 months. 3 months of interviews, networking events, phone calls, follow-ups. Do you have any idea what that's like?" Elena watched him carefully, noting the way his hands clenched and unclenched as he spoke. In the Marines, she'd learned to read body language like a survival skill, identifying who was dangerous, who was scared, who was about to break. Marcus was all through. "I know it's been difficult," she said evenly. "These things take time. The right opportunity will come along." "Time?" Marcus stopped pacing and stared at her incredulously. "Easy for you to say. You sit here all day in your pajamas, playing on your computer, while I'm out there actually trying to support this family." His voice rose with each word, echoing off the walls of their carefully decorated living room. "Do you think this house pays for itself? Do you think your little hobby brings in real money?" The words hit Elena like a physical blow, not because they hurt her feelings, but because they revealed just how completely Marcus had deluded himself about their financial situation. She thought about the $2.3 million that had transferred into their joint account just last week, Vanguard Tech's quarterly distribution to its owner. She thought about the mortgage she'd paid off in full 2 years ago, the investment portfolio worth more than most people's homes, the emergency fund that could support them both for a decade without either of them working. But she also thought about something else, the marriage counselor they'd seen briefly last year, who had warned her that financial disparities could create resentment in relationships. Elena had dismissed it at the time, thinking their love was stronger than money. Now, watching her husband's face contort with bitterness, she realized she'd been naive. "Marcus, you know I contribute to our household," she said carefully. "My consulting work brings in." "Consulting work?" He laughed, a harsh sound that had no humor in it. "Elena, sweetheart, let's be honest here. You answer emails and attend the occasional video call. That's not a career, that's a hobby that barely pays for your coffee habit." He gestured dismissively toward her home office. "Meanwhile, I'm out there competing with people half my age for positions that pay half what I used to make." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known Marcus was struggling with his career setbacks, but she'd had no idea he viewed her work with such contempt. For 6 years she'd built something extraordinary while he assumed she was playing computer games. The disconnect was so profound it was almost surreal. "I've been supporting us financially for months," Marcus continued, his voice gaining momentum like a runaway train. "The savings account that's keeping us afloat, that's from my last job. The lifestyle we're living, that's because I busted my ass in sales for years." He pointed at the flat-screen TV, the leather furniture, the art on the walls. "None of this came from your little computer project." Elena's military training kicked in automatically. When facing an increasingly unstable situation, gather intelligence before responding. "What exactly are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying it's time for you to face reality." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I'm saying it's time for you to stop pretending that what you do matters. I'm saying it's time for you to get a real job and start pulling your weight in this marriage." The thunder outside seemed to punctuate his words, and Elena felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. This wasn't just about his job search anymore. This was about respect, about value, about everything their relationship had been built on. And Marcus had just revealed that in his mind, their marriage was built on a lie. "I see," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her chest. She thought about the 12 federal agencies that trusted her company with their most sensitive data. She thought about the 2,000 employees who depended on her leadership for their livelihood. She thought about the Pentagon official who had called her personally, just yesterday, thanking her for keeping America's digital infrastructure secure. But mostly, she thought about the man standing in front of her, the man she'd married, the man she'd supported through his own career struggles, the man who apparently saw her as a burden rather than a partner. So what you're telling me, Elena continued, her voice taking on a different quality, not angry, but something far more dangerous, is that you think I contribute nothing to this marriage, nothing meaningful, nothing of value. Marcus, apparently mistaking her calm tone for submission, smiled for the first time that evening. Finally, we're getting somewhere. Yes, Elena, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's time to stop playing house and start contributing like an adult. Elena stood up slowly, her movements controlled and deliberate. The woman Marcus thought he knew, the quiet, supportive wife who worked from home doing something with computers, was about to disappear forever. In her place stood Elena Vasquez, CEO of Vanguard Tech Solutions, the woman who had turned a spare bedroom startup into a cybersecurity empire. I understand, she said simply. You think I contribute nothing? Marcus nodded emphatically, apparently satisfied that he'd finally gotten through to her. Exactly, and tomorrow you're going to start looking for a real job, something that brings in actual money instead of this fantasy world you've been living. Elena walked over to her purse and pulled out her phone. The screen displayed 17 missed calls from various Vanguard tech executives, 3 messages from Pentagon officials, and 2 urgent emails from Fortune 500 companies, requesting emergency cybersecurity consultation. She looked at the phone for a long moment, then back at her husband. Marcus, she said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. He crossed his arms, clearly believing he'd won this argument. What? Are you absolutely certain that you want me to stop contributing nothing to this marriage? Something in her tone should have warned him, something in her posture, in the way she held herself, in the sudden stillness that had replaced her earlier calm, should have triggered every survival instinct he possessed. But Marcus was too caught up in his own righteousness to notice that he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Absolutely certain, he said firmly. It's time for you to contribute something real. Elena nodded once, a gesture that somehow managed to be both sad and terrifying. Then tomorrow, she said, you'll get exactly what you asked for. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Elena woke at 0530 hours. Old habits from the Marines died hard, and went through her usual routine: coffee, quick workout, shower, and dressed in her standard work-from-home attire of jeans and a Vanguard Tech polo shirt that Marcus had never bothered to read carefully. She worked quietly in her office while Marcus slept off his anger from the night before, his snoring echoing through the house like a reminder of how oblivious he remained to the storm he'd unleashed. By 0800 hours, Elena had already conducted 2 emergency video conferences with Pentagon officials about a critical security breach at a Navy facility. By 0900 she'd approved a $3.2 million emergency contract deployment and authorized overtime for 47 of her cybersecurity specialists. By 1000 she'd personally called the CEOs of 3 major defense contractors to coordinate a joint response to what was shaping up to be the biggest cyber attack on military infrastructure in years. Marcus finally stumbled into the kitchen at 10:47 a.m., looking rumpled and vaguely hungover despite not having drunk anything stronger than his own bitterness the night before. He poured himself coffee from the pot Elena always prepared, a small courtesy he'd long since stopped acknowledging, and sat at the kitchen island scrolling through job listings on his phone. Good morning, Elena said pleasantly, entering the kitchen with her laptop under her arm. She'd spent the early morning hours making phone calls that would reshape Marcus's world, but her demeanor remained as calm and professional as if she were discussing the weather. Marcus grunted in response, not looking up from his phone. I've got 3 interviews scheduled for today, he announced, as if this proved some point about his superiority. Real companies with real opportunities. Maybe you should take notes on what actual career ambition looks like. Elena set her laptop on the counter and opened it deliberately. The screen displayed the Vanguard Tech executive dashboard, real-time revenue streams, contract statuses, employee metrics, and financial data that would make most Fortune 500 companies weep with envy. The numbers were staggering: $127 million in active contracts, 43 million in pending deals, quarterly revenue that exceeded what most companies made in a year. Actually, Marcus, I want to show you something, Elena said, her voice carrying a new quality, not anger but something far more dangerous, the tone of someone who had made a decision and was now simply executing a plan. Can it wait? I need to prepare for these interviews. Unlike some people, I take my career seriously. He still hadn't looked up from his phone, too absorbed in his own world to notice that his wife's entire demeanor had shifted. No, Elena said simply. It can't wait. Something in her voice finally cut through Marcus's self-absorption. He looked up and for the first time seemed to really see her. She stood differently now, not like the accommodating wife he'd grown accustomed to dismissing, but like someone used to commanding respect. Her posture was straight, her shoulders back, and her eyes held a focused intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of documentaries he'd seen about military leaders. What's so important that it can't wait until after my interviews? He asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Elena turned the laptop screen toward him. I wanted you to see what contributing nothing looks like. Marcus glanced at the screen dismissively. Then his eyes began to focus on the numbers. His expression shifted from boredom to confusion to disbelief. What is some kind of financial modeling software? No, Marcus, this is the real-time dashboard for Vanguard Tech Solutions. My company. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were briefing a subordinate on routine operational data. The company I've been running from our home office for the past 6 years, the company that generated $127 million in revenue last quarter, the company that employs 200 people across 3 states and holds active contracts with 12 federal agencies. Marcus stared at the screen, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. This is some kind of joke, right? Some kind of mock-up you created to prove a point? Elena reached over and clicked on a tab labeled Recent Transaction. The screen filled with a list of payments: $2.3 million from the Department of Defense, $1.8 million from Homeland Security, $4.7 million from a classified Pentagon contract. Each entry was time-stamped, verified, and accompanied by official contract number. Yesterday, while you were telling me I contribute nothing to our marriage, I was coordinating the response to a critical security breach at Naval Base Norfolk, Elena continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. The emergency contract to resolve that breach was worth $3.2 million. I authorized it myself, because as CEO of Vanguard Tech, that's my decision to make. Marcus's phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the granite countertop. This isn't possible. You work from home. You answer emails. I work from home because I own the company. Marcus, the emails I answer are from Pentagon officials, federal agency directors, and Fortune 500 CEOs who need Vanguard Tech's expertise to keep their systems secure. Elena clicked to another screen showing employee rosters. The 200 people on this list, they're my employees, the veterans I've hired, the cybersecurity specialist, the project managers, they all work for me. She pulled up another tab, showing their personal finances. The mortgage that's been paid off for 2 years, I paid that. The investment portfolio worth $4.7 million. That's my money. The BMW you drive, the clothes you wear, the food you eat, it's all funded by the company you just spent 20 minutes telling me contributes nothing. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is impossible. If you were some kind of CEO, I would know about it. People would know about it. People do know about it, Elena said calmly. She pulled up a Forbes article on her screen. Elena Vasquez, the Marine who built America's most trusted cybersecurity empire. The article featured her photo and detailed Vanguard Tech's rise from startup to industry leader. I've been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and Federal Times. Last month, I spoke at a Pentagon cybersecurity summit. Next week I'm testifying before Congress about digital infrastructure security. She scrolled down to show the article's subheading, From Combat Zones to Corporate Boardrooms, How One Veteran Built a $50 million Company, while her husband thought she was unemployed. Marcus's face went white. That can't be real. Oh, but it is. Elena's voice remained perfectly calm, but there was steel underneath now. And here's the interesting part, Marcus. Remember those 3 interviews you have today? Let me guess. TechFlow Industries, Meridian Systems, and Cyberdyne Corporation. Marcus nodded mutely, his mouth hanging slightly open. Fascinating coincidence. Elena continued. pulling up her business contacts. Because Tech Flow Industries is one of our subcontractors, they handle our East Coast installation. Meridian Systems has been trying to partner with Vanguard Tech for 18 months, and Cyberdyne, she smiled for the first time that morning, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Cyberdyne has been our biggest competitor for the past 3 years. She clicked on her email and showed him a message thread from yesterday evening, conversations with the CEOs of all 3 companies, discussing a troubling applicant who had been badmouthing his wife's worthless computer hobby during preliminary phone screening. You see, Marcus, when someone applies for a job in the cybersecurity industry and mentions they're married to someone who plays around with computers and contributes nothing, word gets around. It's a small industry, and everyone knows. Elena's voice was still calm, but now it carried the weight of absolute authority, especially when that someone is married to Elena Vasquez. Marcus sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face as the full implications hit him. Elena, I didn't know. No, she agreed. You didn't know, because you never bothered to ask. You never bothered to learn what I actually do, or why I get calls at all hours, or why I travel to Washington twice a month for computer stuff. She closed the laptop with a decisive click. But you were very clear about what you thought I contributed to our marriage. She stood up and looked down at her husband, her soon-to-be ex-husband, with something that might have been pity. So I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for, Marcus. You wanted me to stop contributing nothing. Consider it done. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a third. Elena watched as he read the messages, his face growing paler with each one. Let me guess, she said, conversationally. 3 interview cancellation. Marcus looked up at her with dawning horror. Elena, please, I made a mistake. I didn't understand. No, Marcus, you understood perfectly. You understood that you thought I was worthless. You understood that you believed I contributed nothing. You understood that you saw me as a burden rather than a partner. Elena picked up her laptop and headed toward her office. The only thing you didn't understand was who you were talking to. She paused in the doorway and looked back at him one final time. Oh, and Mark, you might want to update your LinkedIn profile. Being married to the CEO of Vanguard Tech was probably the only thing keeping your career viable in this industry. But don't worry, after today, that won't be a problem anymore. The silence that followed Elena's departure was deafening. Marcus sat frozen at the kitchen island, staring at his phone screen where 3 rejection messages glowed like digital daggers. The messages were polite but firm. After further consideration, not the right fit for our company culture, we've decided to pursue other candidates. Each one felt like a nail in the coffin of his career. Elena had returned to her office and closed the door, but Marcus could hear the low murmur of her voice as she conducted what sounded like a very important phone call. Words like classified contract and Pentagon authorization drifted through the walls, each phrase a reminder of how catastrophically he'd misjudged his wife. The woman he'd dismissed as unemployed was apparently coordinating national security operations, while he sat in their kitchen having an existential crisis. His hands shaking, Marcus opened his laptop and Googled Elena Vasquez Vanguard Tech. The search results hit him like a tsunami. Hundreds of articles, interviews, and industry reports filled his screen. Forbes, 40 under 40. TechCrunch, most innovative cybersecurity leaders. Federal Times, veteran entrepreneurs changing America. Photo after photo of his wife, his quiet, unassuming wife, speaking at conferences, accepting awards, shaking hands with Pentagon officials and Fortune 500 CEOs. The most recent article was dated just 3 weeks ago. Vanguard Tech CEO Elena Vasquez secures $75 million in new federal contract. The article featured a photo of Elena in a sharp business suit, standing confidently in what appeared to be the Pentagon, surrounded by military officials and government executives. She looked powerful, respected, absolutely nothing like the woman in jeans and a t-shirt who'd been working quietly in their home office. Marcus scrolled through the comments section, his heart sinking with each post. Elena Vasquez is a legend in the cybersecurity industry. Vanguard Tech has saved my company millions in potential breach costs. Met her at DEF CON last year. brilliant woman. Her company is the gold standard for federal cybersecurity. My brother works for Vanguard Tech, says she's the best CEO he's ever had, takes care of her employees like family. Heard she still personally reviews every major contract. That's real leadership. The final comment made him physically nauseous. Lucky guy whoever married her. She's not just successful. She's genuinely good people. Total package. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his friend Derek, who worked in tech sales. Dude, what the hell? My company just pulled your application. Said something about incompatible values and misrepresenting family circumstances. What did you do? Before Marcus could respond, another text arrived from his former colleague Janet. Marcus, I just heard from 3 different companies that you're blacklisted from interviews. What happened? Did you lie about something on your resume? Then another from his networking contact at TechFlow. Hey man, I tried to put in a good word for you, but apparently you said some things about your wife that didn't sit well with management. Elena Vasquez is like royalty in this industry. What were you thinking? The messages kept coming. A steady stream of professional contacts asking what he'd done to torpedo his own career. Word traveled fast in the tight-knit tech community, and apparently Marcus had become a cautionary tale in record time. Elena emerged from her office 3 hours later, dressed in a sharp black business suit that Marcus had never seen before. She carried a briefcase and moved with the confident stride of someone who had important places to be. This wasn't the casual work-from-home wife he'd grown accustomed to dismissing. This was Elena Vasquez, CEO in full professional mode. I have to go to Washington, she announced matter-of-factly. Emergency briefing at the Pentagon. There's been a major cyber attack on military supply chains, and they need Vanguard Tech's response team mobilized immediately. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his face still pale from the morning's revelations. Elena, we need to talk about. No, Marcus, Her voice was calm but final. You made your position very clear last night. You think I contribute nothing to this marriage, so I'm going to honor that assessment. She set a manila folder on the kitchen counter. I've already spoken with my attorney. Divorce papers will be filed on Monday. I'm being generous with the settlement. You'll get the BMW, and enough money to get back on your feet, but you'll need to find your own place within 30 days. Marcus stood up abruptly. Elena, please, I was wrong. I was frustrated and angry, and I said things I didn't mean. I had no idea about your company, about what you've accomplished. If you had known, Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. Marcus, you lived with me for 5 years. You watched me take calls at all hours, work weekends, traveled to DC twice a month. You saw the awards on my bookshelf, the military commendations, the business books. The information was all there. You just chose not to see it because it was more convenient to see me as less than I am. She checked her watch, a sleek Rolex that Marcus now realized probably cost more than his car. The real tragedy isn't that you didn't know about Vanguard Tech, it's that you never bothered to know me, the woman you married, the person I actually am. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. But I love you. We can fix this. I can learn. You love who you thought I was, Elena corrected gently. You loved the idea of a supportive wife who didn't threaten your ego, who made you feel like the successful one in the relation. You never loved Elena Vasquez, the person, because you never took the time to find out who that was. A black sedan pulled into their driveway, followed by a second vehicle with government plates. Elena gathered her briefcase and headed for the door. The Pentagon is sending a security detail, she explained, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. When you're coordinating the response to a national security crisis, they don't take chances with civilian transportation. Marcus watched through the window as 2 men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles and approached their front door. They moved with the same controlled confidence as his wife, clearly professionals who took their job serious. Elena, Marcus called out desperately as she reached for the door handle. What about us? What about our marriage? She paused and looked back at him one final time. In her eyes, Marcus saw not anger or hatred, but something far worse and different. The woman who had once looked at him with love, now regarded him with the same professional politeness she might show to a stranger. Marcus, you told me I contribute nothing to this marriage. Today you're getting exactly what you asked for. She opened the door and stepped into the waiting sedan. The only difference is that now you know exactly how much nothing is worth. As the government vehicles pulled away from their driveway, Marcus stood alone in the kitchen of the house, his wife owned, surrounded by the life she'd built, finally understanding the true cost of his work. He had asked for a wife who contributed nothing, and in return he'd lost the woman who had contributed everything. The irony was devastating. In trying to diminish Elena, he had only diminished himself. And in the unforgiving world of cybersecurity, where reputation was everything, and Elena Vasquez was royalty, Marcus had just discovered that some mistakes can't be undone. His phone buzzed with one final message, this time from a headhunter he'd worked with for years. "Marcus, I don't know what happened, but your name is radioactive in tech right now. Might want to consider a career change, maybe something outside the industry entirely." Marcus set down his phone and looked around the empty house. Elena's house, he now realized, and finally understood what contributing nothing actually meant. 6 months later, Elena stood at the podium in the Pentagon's main briefing room, addressing a packed audience of military officials, government executives, and cybersecurity leaders from around the world. The PowerPoint slide behind her displayed Vanguard Tech's latest achievement, a revolutionary AI-driven security protocol that had successfully prevented 17 major cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in just the past quarter. The beauty of this system, Elena explained to the assembled crowd, is that it learns from each attempted breach, becoming stronger and more adaptive with every challenge. Her voice carried easily through the room, confident and authoritative. What started as a veteran-owned startup in a spare bedroom has now become America's first line of defense against digital warfare. The audience, generals, admirals, CEOs, and federal agency directors, listened with rapt attention. Elena had become something of a legend in Washington circles, the Marine who had translated battlefield awareness into digital security mastery. Her company now employed over 500 people across 12 states, and Vanguard Tech's contracts with the federal government had grown to exceed $200 million annually. After the presentation, Elena was approached by Admiral Rebecca Chen, head of the Navy's cybersecurity division. "Vasquez, outstanding work as always. I have to ask, the personal resilience you showed during your own life challenges, how did that influence Vanguard Tech's corporate culture?" Elena smiled, knowing the admiral was referring to the divorce that had become somewhat infamous in tech circles. The story of the CEO whose husband didn't know what she did for a living had spread through the industry like wildfire, becoming a cautionary tale about assumptions and respect in relationships. "Admiral, one of the most important lessons I learned in the Marines is that people will show you who they really are when they think you can't fight back," Elena replied thoughtfully. "That applies whether you're dealing with enemy combatants or personal relationships. The key is never to take it personally, just gather intelligence and respond appropriately." Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Sacramento, Marcus sat in a cramped apartment that bore no resemblance to the life he'd once lived. After being effectively blacklisted from the tech industry, he'd eventually found work as a regional sales manager for a small office supply company. The pay was a fraction of what he'd once earned, and the work felt soul-crushing after years in cutting-edge technology sector. His new colleagues had no idea about his past, about the marriage he'd destroyed, or about the woman whose success had once elevated his own prospects. Marcus had learned to keep quiet about his personal history. The few times he'd mentioned being divorced from someone in tech, the conversations had taken uncomfortable turns when people started asking questions. The worst part wasn't the financial downgrade, or even the professional humiliation. It was the growing awareness of what he'd lost. Every news article about Vanguard Tech, and there were many, felt like a knife twist. Elena's company had been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine. She'd been invited to speak at Harvard Business School. The president had personally commended Vanguard Tech's role in preventing a major attack on the power grid. Marcus had been married to one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America, and he'd thrown it away because he couldn't handle the idea that she might be more accomplished than he was. The divorce settlement had been exactly as generous as Elena promised, enough money to get back on his feet, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd actually been funding. The BMW was gone, replaced by a used Honda Civic that reminded him daily of Elena's practical choices. She'd kept the house, of course, though Marcus had learned through mutual acquaintances that she'd eventually sold it and bought a stunning penthouse in downtown Denver, complete with a home office that could rival most corporate headquarters. Back in Washington, Elena's presentation had concluded to thunderous applause. As she gathered her materials, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that rainy evening when Marcus had declared she contributed nothing. The divorce had been finalized within 3 months. Elena's attorney was as efficient as everything else in her life. There had been no custody issues, no complicated asset division, no drawn-out negotiation. Marcus had signed everything without contest, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd lost. Elena had thrown herself into work with renewed energy, expanding Vanguard Tech's operations and taking on increasingly complex challenges. The company had opened offices in Silicon Valley, Austin, and Atlanta. They'd acquired 2 smaller cybersecurity firms and launched an internship program specifically for military veterans transitioning to civilian careers. Elena's personal net worth had crossed into 9 figures, but more importantly, she'd built something that mattered, a company that was literally keeping America safe. The personal cost had been significant. Elena had dated occasionally over the past 6 months, but found it difficult to trust potential partners. The experience with Marcus had taught her that financial success could be as much a barrier to genuine relationships as an asset. She'd implemented a new policy for her personal life: complete transparency from the beginning. Anyone she dated knew exactly who she was and what she'd accomplished before they got serious. Some men were intimidated and disappeared quickly. Others were clearly more interested in her wealth than her personality, but a few, fellow entrepreneurs, military veterans, accomplished professionals in their own right, had proven capable of seeing Elena as a complete person rather than a bank account or a trophy. Her assistant knocked on the briefing room door. "Ms. Vasquez, the car is ready for the airport. You have the TechCrunch interview at 2 o'clock Pacific time, and the board meeting is scheduled for 5. Elena nodded and gathered her briefcase. She had a company to run, employees to support, and a country to protect. The life she'd built was demanding, complex, and incredibly rewarding. It was also completely her own, built on her terms, without having to diminish herself to make someone else feel comfortable. As the government sedan pulled away from the Pentagon, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Marcus had been right about one thing. She had indeed stopped contributing nothing to their marriage, but only because there was no longer a marriage to contribute to. The story of their divorce had become something of a legend in business schools and tech conferences, a masterclass in recognizing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Elena had never spoken publicly about Marcus or their relationship, maintaining the same professional discretion she brought to classified government contracts, but the lesson was clear to anyone paying attention. Some people will only recognize your value after they've lost access to. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister Maria. "Saw you on CNN this morning." Mom called, crying happy tears again. "She's so proud of you." Elena smiled and typed back, "Tell her the next interview is with 60 Minutes. She'll need tissues." As the sedan merged into traffic, Elena looked out at the city where she now had genuine influence and respect. She thought briefly about Marcus and his Sacramento apartment, probably scrolling through job listings and wondering how his life had taken such a dramatic turn. The truth was, Elena didn't wish him harm. She hoped he'd learned something from their experience, hoped he'd become the kind of man who could appreciate a strong partner rather than feeling threatened by one. But that was his journey to make, and Elena had more important things to focus on. After all, she had a country to protect and a company to grow, and unlike her former marriage, both of those relationships were built on mutual respect, clear communication, and honest recognition of what each party brought to the table. Elena Vasquez had finally found partnerships where she could contribute everything and receive the same in return. 2 years after the divorce, Marcus received an invitation that felt like a cruel joke from the universe. The envelope was thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering that spelled out Vanguard Tech Solutions in elegant script. Inside was a formal invitation to the company's annual charity gala, an event supporting military veteran employment program. At the bottom, in Elena's familiar handwriting, was a personal note. "Thought you might be interested in seeing what contributing something looks like. No pressure to attend." Marcus stared at the invitation for 3 days before making his decision. Perhaps it was masochism, or maybe genuine curiosity about the life he'd thrown away, but something compelled him to RSVP yes. He bought his first suit in 2 years, a modest off-the-rack affair that would have horrified his former self, and drove the 6 hours from Sacramento to Denver. The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt, the same hotel where he and Elena had celebrated their wedding reception 7 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him as he walked through the familiar marble lobby, now wearing a cheap suit instead of the custom tuxedo Elena had bought him for their wedding. The ballroom was packed with Denver's elite, politicians, military officials, tech entrepreneurs, and federal agency directors. A banner across the stage read, Vanguard Tech Foundation, $50 million raised for veteran employment programs. Marcus found a seat at a table in the back, hoping to remain invisible among the crowd of 800. He watched as Elena took the stage, resplendent in an elegant navy dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She looked radiant, confident, and completely at peace with herself. The transformation from the quiet woman in jeans and a t-shirt was remarkable. This was Elena Vasquez in her full power, commanding a room full of the most influential people in Colorado. When I started Vanguard Tech 8 years ago, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system, I had a simple mission: create a company where military veterans could use their skills to protect America in a new kind of battlefield. Today, I'm proud to announce that Vanguard Tech employs over 700 veterans across 15 states, and our foundation has helped place more than 3,000 former service members in meaningful careers. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus found himself clapping along despite the complex emotions churning in his chest. He couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and devastation. Pride that he'd once been married to such an extraordinary woman, and devastation that he'd been too blind to see her work. Elena continued her speech, outlining Vanguard Tech's latest achievements, a partnership with MIT to develop next-generation cybersecurity protocols, a $500 million contract to protect the nation's power grid, and the opening of their new headquarters in Denver, a 40-story building that would house 2,000 employees and serve as the hub for America's digital defense network. But tonight isn't just about business success, Elena said, her tone shifting to something more personal. It's about understanding that everyone has value, everyone has potential, and everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are. Too often, we make assumptions about people based on surface appearances or limited information. Real success comes from recognizing the hidden strengths in ourselves and others. Marcus felt those words hit him like a physical blow. He knew Elena was speaking generally to the crowd, but every word felt personally directed at him. She was talking about the fundamental mistake that had cost him everything, judging her worth based on his own limited perspective rather than taking the time to truly know the woman he'd married. After the formal presentation, Elena worked the room with the skill of a seasoned politician, moving from table to table, greeting guests, and discussing business with military officials and tech leaders. Marcus watched from a distance as she laughed with a 3-star general, shook hands with the governor of Colorado, and embraced other veteran entrepreneurs whose companies had grown under Vanguard Tech's mentorship program. It was then that Marcus noticed the man who seemed to stay close to Elena's side throughout the evening. He was tall, distinguished, probably in his early 40s, wearing a military dress uniform, decorated with ribbons and medals. The way Elena looked at him, the comfortable intimacy of their interactions, made it clear that this wasn't just a business associate. During a quiet moment, Marcus overheard Elena introducing the man to a group of guests. This is Colonel David Harrison, retired Special Forces. He runs our new veteran transition program. The warmth in her voice when she said his name told Marcus everything he needed to know about their relationship. Colonel Harrison was everything Marcus wasn't: confident without being arrogant, accomplished in his own right, clearly comfortable with Elena's success rather than threatened by it. When Elena mentioned a recent Pentagon briefing, Harrison's face showed genuine pride in her achievement. When she deferred to his expertise on veteran employment issues, he gave her the same respectful attention. Marcus watched them together and realized he was seeing what a partnership of equals looked like. There was no competition between them, no resentment, no need for either person to diminish themselves to make the other feel better.
They were two accomplished professionals who enhanced each other's strengths rather than competing for dominance. As the evening wound down, Elena approached Marcus's table. She looked exactly the same up close. The scar on her temple, the intelligent eyes, the quiet strength that he'd somehow never appreciated when they were married. "Thank you for coming," she said simply, sitting down beside him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Marcus admitted. "Elena, I owe you an apology, a real one. I spent 2 years thinking about what I would say if I ever saw you again." Elena listened quietly as Marcus finally found the words he should have said years earlier. He apologized for his blindness, his arrogance, his complete failure to see her for who she really was. He acknowledged that he'd wasted 5 years of both their lives by being too insecure to appreciate what they could have built together. "I know it doesn't change anything," Marcus concluded, "but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost, what you've accomplished, what you deserved all along." Elena was quiet for a long moment, then nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus, I hope you find someone who sees your worth the way David sees mine. Everyone deserves that kind of partnership." She stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I don't regret our marriage. It taught me never to settle for less than I deserve. And watching you tonight, I think maybe it taught you something valuable too." As Elena walked away to rejoin Colonel Harrison and the other guests, Marcus sat alone at his table, surrounded by the evidence of everything his ex-wife had built. The charity gala would raise $12 million that night. Elena's foundation would help thousands of veterans find meaningful careers. Vanguard Tech would continue protecting America's digital infrastructure, and Marcus would drive back to Sacramento with a new understanding of what he'd lost, not just a successful wife, but the chance to be part of something larger than himself, something that mattered. The invitation to the gala had been Elena's final gift to him, the opportunity to see what contributing everything looked like when it was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. It was a lesson worth learning, even if it came too late to save his marriage. Marcus left the hotel that night with a strange sense of closure. He finally understood what Elena had tried to tell him years earlier. Real success wasn't about being the most important person in the room. It was about recognizing the importance of everyone around you. It was a lesson that would change how Marcus approached every relationship for the rest of his life, though he would never again have the chance to practice it with the extraordinary woman who had taught it to him.
5 years after Elena's charity gala, the story of their marriage had taken on a life of its own. What started as whispered conversations in Denver tech circles had evolved into a case study taught at Harvard Business School, Stanford Graduate School of Business, and the Wharton School. The curriculum was titled Recognition and Respect: Leadership Lessons from the Vanguard Tech Case Study, and it examined how assumptions about worth and contribution can destroy both personal relationships and professional opportunities. Professor Sarah Chen at Stanford often began her executive leadership seminars with a simple question: how well do you really know the people closest to you? She would then share the anonymized story of a CEO whose own spouse never knew about her company's success, leading to a discussion about the importance of genuine curiosity and respect in all relationships, personal and professional. Meanwhile, Elena had become one of the most recognizable figures in American business. Vanguard Tech had gone public 3 years earlier in the largest IPO in cybersecurity history, raising $2.8 billion and valuing the company at $115 billion. Elena, who still owned 60% of the shares, had become one of the youngest billionaires in America, but more than the wealth, she had built something that mattered. A company that employed over 2,500 veterans and protected critical infrastructure for allied nations around the world. Her marriage to Colonel David Harrison had been a quiet affair, a small ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, surrounded by military friends and Vanguard Tech employees. The wedding photos, when they appeared in business magazines, showed two people who clearly saw each other as equal. David had transitioned from military service to become Vanguard Tech's chief operating officer, bringing his strategic planning expertise to complement Elena's technical vision. Their partnership was everything her marriage to Marcus had never been, built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine understanding of each other's capabilities. In Sacramento, Marcus had slowly rebuilt his life, though it bore little resemblance to his former existence. The lessons learned from his catastrophic failure with Elena had fundamentally changed how he approached relationships. He'd left the office supply company after 2 years and started a small business consulting firm, specializing in helping family-owned businesses improve communication and operational efficiency. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest professional failure had taught him skills that others desperately needed. His new girlfriend, Jennifer, was a high school principal who made a fraction of what Elena earned, but commanded respect in her own field. From their first date, Marcus had made it a point to understand not just what Jennifer did, but why she was passionate about education and how her work impacted their community. He attended school board meetings, learned about education policy, and genuinely appreciated the complexity of leading a school with 1,200 students and 80 faculty members. "You ask more questions about my work than any man I've ever dated," Jennifer had told him after 6 months together. "It's like you actually want to understand what I do." Marcus had smiled sadly at that comment, knowing it came from hard-earned wisdom about the cost of not understanding the people you claim to love. The tech industry had never forgotten the lesson of Marcus and Elena either. The story had spawned countless articles about unconscious bias in relationships, recognizing hidden achievements, and the importance of supporting your partner's success. Elena had never publicly discussed Marcus or their marriage, maintaining her characteristic discretion, but the business community had drawn its own conclusions about respect and recognition. At Vanguard Tech's annual company meeting, Elena often spoke about the importance of seeing potential in people that others might overlook. "Some of our best innovations have come from employees who were underestimated at previous companies," she would tell the assembled staff. "Never assume you know someone's full capabilities based on their current role or how others perceive them." The veteran employees especially connected with this message. Many of them had struggled to translate military skills into civilian careers before Vanguard Tech gave them opportunities to excel. Elena's own story of being seen as just a wife who played with computers while running a multi-billion-dollar company resonated deeply with anyone who had ever been undervalued or misunderstood. Rachel Morrison, a relationship therapist in Denver, had built her practice around concepts inspired by Elena's story. She often used the case as an example of how lack of curiosity could destroy even the strongest relationship. "One partner was literally married to one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America and never knew it," she would tell couples during counseling sessions. "What does that tell us about the importance of really listening to each other?" The therapy sessions revealed a common pattern. People often stopped learning about their partners once they thought they had them figured out. The assumption that you knew everything important about someone you lived with was not only arrogant but dangerous to the relationship's long-term health. Elena herself had become an advocate for financial transparency in relationships. During a rare personal interview with Forbes, she had spoken about the importance of both partners understanding the family's financial situation. "Secrets about money, careers, or capabilities inevitably create imbalances that poison relationships," she had said. "Real partnership requires real honesty." The interview had generated thousands of comments from readers sharing their own stories about financial secrecy, career assumptions, and relationship power dynamics. Elena's story had given people a framework for discussing uncomfortable truths about respect and recognition in their own lives. As Vanguard Tech continued to grow, now with offices in 12 countries and contracts protecting infrastructure from Washington to Tokyo, Elena remained grounded in the lessons her first marriage had taught her. She insisted on transparency in all her relationships, both personal and professional. Her leadership team knew exactly how decisions were made, what Elena's vision was for the company, and how their individual contributions fit into the larger mission. The woman who had once been dismissed as contributing nothing had built something that would outlast any individual relationship or recognition. Vanguard Tech's cybersecurity protocols were protecting water treatment plants in California, power grids in Texas, and communication networks across the federal government. The company's veteran employment programs had become a model replicated by dozens of other corporations. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Elena's story wasn't in business schools or therapy offices or corporate boardrooms. It was in the countless conversations between couples who had heard the story and asked themselves, "Do I really know my partner? Do I really see them for who they are? Am I contributing to their success or diminishing it?" The story of the CEO whose husband never knew what she did had become more than just a cautionary tale about assumption. It had become a mirror that forced people to examine their own relationships and ask whether they were building their partners up or tearing them down. And in that reflection, Elena's greatest contribution wasn't to cybersecurity or veteran employment or even American national security. It was teaching millions of people that everyone deserves to be truly seen, genuinely understood, and fully respected for who they really are. The woman who had once been told she contributed nothing had contributed a lesson that would strengthen relationships for generations to come. 10 years after that rainy evening when Marcus had declared Elena worthless, she stood before the United States Congress, delivering testimony that would reshape America's approach to cybersecurity. The hearing room was packed with senators, representatives, Pentagon officials, and media representatives from around the world. Elena, now 44, commanded the room with the same quiet authority she'd once brought to Marine Corps briefings in Iraq, but amplified by a decade of unprecedented success. Senators, the threat landscape has evolved beyond what most Americans can imagine, Elena testified, her voice clear and confident. Nation-state actors are no longer targeting just government systems. They're attacking our power grids, water treatment facilities, financial networks, and communication infrastructure. Vanguard Tech's AI-driven defense systems have prevented over 50,000 critical attacks in the past year alone. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chair, leaned forward with obvious respect. Ms. Vasquez, your company has become essential to our national security. Can you help us understand how a veteran-owned startup became America's primary digital defense contractor? Elena smiled slightly, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Senator, success in cybersecurity requires the same skills I learned as a Marine logistics officer: attention to detail, understanding interconnected systems, and never underestimating your adversary. But most importantly, it requires recognizing potential where others see limitations. What the senators didn't know was that earlier that morning, Elena had received an unexpected email from Marcus. 10 years of silence had been broken by a simple message. Watching you on C-SPAN. Mom would be proud. I hope you know that everything you've built matters more than I ever understood. Thank you for the lesson. Elena had stared at the email for several minutes before responding with equal simplicity. Thank you. I hope you're well. The exchange had brought unexpected closure to a chapter of her life that had shaped everything that followed. Marcus's recognition, though a decade too late, somehow felt important, not because she needed his validation, but because it represented the completion of a lesson that had changed both their lives. After the congressional hearing, Elena returned to Vanguard Tech's headquarters in Denver, a gleaming 50-story tower that had become a symbol of American technological leadership. The building housed 3,500 employees across dozens of specialized teams: former NSA cryptographers, ex-military intelligence analysts, MIT computer science graduates, and veteran technicians whose military experience translated perfectly to digital warfare. Elena's office occupied the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. The space was elegant but functional, decorated with mementos from her Marine service, awards from tech industry organizations, and photos from Vanguard Tech's global office. But the centerpiece remained the same, framed photo from her unit in Fallujah, a reminder of where her journey had begun. Dr. David Harrison, now her husband of 5 years and Vanguard Tech's chief operating officer, knocked on her office door. How did the testimony go? Congress is finally taking digital infrastructure seriously, Elena replied, but David could hear something else in her voice. And? Elena showed him Marcus's email. David read it quietly, then looked at his wife with the understanding that came from truly knowing someone. How do you feel about that? Grateful, Elena said after a moment. Not for his recognition. I stopped needing that years ago, but grateful that he learned something from what happened between us. Grateful that our story might have taught him to see other people more clearly. David nodded. He'd heard the story many times, not from Elena directly. She rarely spoke about her first marriage, but from the business articles, case studies, and industry conversations that had made their relationship legendary in business circles. What impressed him most wasn't Elena's success, but her grace in handling both triumph and betrayal. Speaking of seeing people clearly, David said, pulling up his tablet. I have the quarterly reports from our veteran employment program. The numbers were staggering. Vanguard Tech and its affiliated programs had now placed over 15,000 veterans in meaningful careers across the tech industry. The company's model had been replicated by hundreds of other corporations, creating a pipeline that transformed military experience into civilian success. Elena had built something that went far beyond profit. She'd created a system that recognized and utilized talent that others had overlooked. There's something else, David continued. The Pentagon wants to discuss expanding our international operations. They're looking at a $5 billion contract to protect allied nation infrastructure. It would make Vanguard Tech the first private company to coordinate cybersecurity for NATO. Elena absorbed this information with the same calm focus she brought to every major decision. $5 billion. NATO-level responsibility. The quiet woman who had once been dismissed as contributing nothing was now being asked to protect the digital infrastructure of the entire Western Alliance. But what struck her most wasn't the scale of the opportunity, it was how far she'd traveled from that rainy evening when Marcus had attacked her work. The woman who had sat in their home office, quietly building something extraordinary while her husband assumed she was unemployed, was now being entrusted with the digital security of dozens of nations. Elena's assistant buzzed through the intercom. Vasquez, you have a call from the Secretary of Defense. As Elena picked up the phone to discuss matters of national security with the Pentagon's highest officials, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. Marcus's cruel words that night had been intended to diminish her, to make her feel worthless and insignificant. Instead, they had freed her from a relationship that was holding her back and forced her to fully claim her own worth. The irony was profound. In trying to make Elena feel like nothing, Marcus had inadvertently pushed her to become everything she was capable of being. His inability to see her value had ultimately forced the world to recognize. After the call with the Secretary of Defense, Elena walked to her office windows and looked out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere in the city below, other couples were probably having the same conversation she and Marcus had 10 years ago, arguments about worth and contribution, respect and recognition. She hoped they would handle it better than Marcus had. She hoped they would choose curiosity over assumption, support over competition, partnership over dominance. Elena's story had become bigger than just her personal success. It had become a touchstone for anyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or undervalued. From the veterans struggling to translate military skills into civilian careers, to the entrepreneur whose family didn't understand their worth, to the spouse whose contributions were invisible to their partner, Elena's journey from nothing to everything had shown that worth exists, independent of recognition, and that sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see who we really are. As Vanguard Tech prepared to take on its most significant challenge yet, protecting the digital infrastructure of the free world, Elena carried with her the lesson that had made it all possible. Never let anyone else define your worth, and never stop building something that matters, even if the people around you can't see its value. The woman who had once been told she contributed nothing was now contributing to the security and prosperity of nations. And that transformation had begun not with recognition or validation, but with the simple decision to refuse to be diminished by someone else's limitations. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is underestimating you completely. It forces you to prove, not to them but to yourself, exactly how much you're capable of achieving. 15 years after that fateful night, Elena stood in the nursery of her Denver penthouse, gently rocking her 6-month-old daughter Sarah, named after Elena's mother who had passed away 5 years earlier. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, unaware that she was being held by one of the most powerful women in America. Through the nursery window, the lights of downtown Denver sparkled below, including the illuminated Vanguard Tech Tower that had become an iconic part of the city's skyline. David entered quietly, carrying a tablet displaying the latest news coverage. The NATO contract signing made the front page of every major newspaper. He was showing her headlines from around the world. Vanguard Tech becomes first private company to coordinate Global Alliance cybersecurity. Elena Vasquez, from Marine to Digital Guardian of the Free World.
And the $10 billion woman who protects democracy. Elena smiled softly, adjusting baby Sarah's blanket. She'll grow up in a world where women leading technology companies isn't unusual, she murmured. That's worth more than any contract. The transformation had been complete. Vanguard Tech now operated in 47 countries, employed over 12,000 people, and generated annual revenues exceeding $8 billion. Elena's personal net worth had crossed $3.2 billion, but more importantly, her company's technology protected the digital infrastructure that 2.8 billion people depended on daily. From power grids in Tokyo to banking systems in London, Vanguard Tech's AI-driven security protocols had become the invisible foundation that kept modern civilization functioning. But perhaps the most significant change was culture. The story of Elena and Marcus had evolved beyond business case studies into a broader social movement about recognition and respect. Universities now offered courses on unconscious bias in personal relations. The Vanguard Tech effect had entered common vocabulary, describing situations where someone's true capabilities were hidden by others' assumptions. Dating apps had even introduced features encouraging users to ask deeper questions about their matches' careers and aspirations. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, the relationship therapist who had built her practice around concepts inspired by Elena's story, had just published a best-selling book titled Seeing Your Partner: The Hidden Costs of Assumption in Love. The book's dedication read, "To every person whose worth was invisible to those who should have seen it most clearly." Meanwhile, in Sacramento, Marcus had found an unexpected peak. His consulting business had grown into a modest success, specializing in helping family businesses navigate communication challenges and succession planning. His relationship with Jennifer had deepened into marriage, built on the foundation of genuine curiosity and mutual respect that Elena's story had taught him to value. On the 10th anniversary of his divorce from Elena, Marcus had written a letter he never sent, but the process had brought him closure. "I spent 5 years married to an extraordinary woman and never bothered to really know her. I've spent 10 years learning to be worthy of the lesson she taught me. I hope someday I can be for someone else what I should have been for her." Jennifer, who knew the full story of Marcus's first marriage, had helped him understand that his greatest contribution to the world might be ensuring that other men learned from his mistakes. Marcus had begun speaking at men's support groups about the importance of truly supporting their partner's ambitions, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the cost of ego and assumption. The hardest part, Marcus would tell these groups, wasn't losing the lifestyle or facing the professional consequences. It was realizing I had been married to someone incredible and was too insecure to appreciate what that meant. Elena rarely thought about Marcus anymore, but when she did, it was with a strange gratitude. His inability to see her worth had forced her to see it herself, and that self-recognition had unlocked achievements she might never have pursued if she'd remained in a relationship that required her to stay small. As baby Sarah grew, Elena planned to tell her daughter about the importance of choosing partners who celebrated rather than diminished her accomplishments, but she also planned to teach her about grace in victory, about using success to lift others rather than to prove superiority. The Vanguard Tech Foundation had expanded beyond veteran employment to include programs for underestimated populations of all kinds: women in STEM fields, minorities in cybersecurity, immigrants with technical skills, and anyone whose potential had been overlooked by traditional hiring practices. Elena's experience of being unseen had given her extraordinary insight into recognizing hidden talent in others. At the latest Foundation Gala, Elena had announced the creation of the Recognition Scholarship Program, full college funding for students whose abilities had been underestimated by their schools or family. The first recipient was Maria Santos, a young woman whose parents had dismissed her interest in computer science as playing with toys, until she developed an app that detected early signs of diabetes using smartphone camera. "Everyone deserves to have their potential recognized," Elena had told the scholarship recipients during the award ceremony, but more importantly, everyone deserves to recognize their own potential regardless of whether others see it. The speech had gone viral on social media, generating millions of views and thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of being underestimated. The hashtag #JunRecognizeWorth became a movement, encouraging people to really see and support the achievements of those around them. Elena's story had become more than personal vindication. It had become a catalyst for cultural change. Business schools taught it, relationship counselors referenced it, and parents used it to discuss the importance of supporting their children's ambitions, regardless of gender stereotypes or social expectations. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was happening in homes around the world, where couples inspired by Elena's story were having difficult but necessary conversations about recognition, support, and assumption. Marriages were being saved by partners who finally asked, "Do I really know what you do? Do I really see your worth?" As Elena tucked baby Sarah into her crib, she thought about the world her daughter would inherit. It would be a world where Elena's technology protected digital infrastructure, where her foundation programs created opportunities for overlooked talent, and where her story continued to inspire people to truly see and value those they love. The woman who had once been told she contributed nothing, had contributed to the fundamental way society thought about worth, recognition, and human potential, and that legacy would continue long after Vanguard Tech, long after the business empire, long after Elena herself. Baby Sarah would grow up in a world where being underestimated was recognized as a form of blindness, where supporting your partner's success was seen as strength rather than weakness, and where everyone understood that the most dangerous assumption you can make is that you already know everything important about the people you love. Elena's greatest contribution wasn't protecting infrastructure or building a tech empire. It was teaching the world that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be truly seen for who they are and what they're capable of becoming. That lesson would outlast everything else, rippling through generations of relationships, creating a world where being unseen was no longer an option, and where love meant truly knowing the extraordinary person you chose to share your life with.
20 years had passed since that storm-soaked evening, when Marcus had uttered the words that would reshape not just two lives but the consciousness of an entire civilization. Elena Vasquez Harrison now stood before the United Nations General Assembly, her silver-streaked hair catching the lights of the most important podium in the world. At 54, she had transcended business success to become something unprecedented, a moral compass for humanity's relationship with recognition and worth. Distinguished delegates, Elena began, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of transformation. We gather today not just to discuss cybersecurity protocols, but to address a fundamental threat to human civilization: our collective failure to recognize the extraordinary potential that exists within ordinary moments, ordinary people, and ordinary relationships. The speech would later be remembered as the recognition address, a moment when the leader of the world's most powerful cybersecurity empire challenged global leaders to examine how their own blindness to human worth was creating the very vulnerabilities she spent her life protecting against. In the audience sat presidents, prime ministers, and world leaders who had come to depend on Vanguard Tech's protection of their nation's digital infrastructure. But Elena's message transcended technology. She spoke about the Marcus paradigm, her term for the dangerous human tendency to underestimate those closest to us while overestimating distant threats. Every cyber attack I've prevented, Elena continued, began with someone in a position of trust who failed to recognize a colleague's potential, ignored a subordinate's warnings, or dismissed a partner's capability. The greatest security vulnerabilities aren't in our code, they're in our inability to truly see each other. The UN delegates listened with rapt attention as Elena outlined what had become known as the Vanguard Tech Doctrine, a framework for recognizing hidden value that had been adopted by corporations, governments, and educational institutions worldwide. The doctrine's core principle was deceptively simple: assume you know less about people than you think you do, especially those you see every day. Meanwhile, in a small classroom in Sacramento, Marcus stood before a group of 8th graders as part of a program called Lessons from Failure. Now 52, he had become an unlikely educator, sharing his story with young people about the importance of recognizing worth in their peers, teachers, and eventually their future partners. I was married to one of the most successful people in America, Marcus told the students, and I didn't know it for 5 years. Not because she was hiding it, but because I never bothered to really look. I never asked the right questions. I never saw her as a complete person. The students, most of whom had grown up knowing Elena's name the way previous generations knew Einstein or Kennedy, listened with fascination to this real-life cautionary tale. Marcus's presentations had become legendary in education circles, the man who had lived the world's most famous example of blindness to potential, now dedicated to ensuring others never repeated his mistake. The question I want you to remember, Marcus continued, is this. Who in your life might be extraordinary that you're not seeing clearly? Your quiet classmate who sits alone, your teacher who seems strict but might have amazing stories, your parents who you think are just One student raised her hand. Mr. Marcus, do you think Miss Elena forgave you? Marcus paused, considering the question that still haunted him after 2 decades. I think she did something better than forgive me. She used what I did to help millions of other people avoid making the same mistake. That's not just forgiveness, that's transformation. Back at the United Nations, Elena was concluding her address with a revelation that would make headlines around the world. Today, I'm announcing the establishment of the Global Recognition Institute, a $5 billion initiative to fundamentally change how humanity sees and develops human potential. This institute will operate in every nation, offering programs that teach the skills of truly seeing others, recognizing hidden capabilities, and building relationships based on genuine understanding, rather than assumption. The announcement sent shockwaves through the global community. Elena was essentially using her vast wealth to attempt the largest social engineering project in human history, teaching an entire species to see each other more clearly. The Institute's first initiative would be the Sarah Protocol, named after Elena's now 15-year-old daughter, who had grown up watching her mother transform personal pain into global healing. The protocol would be implemented in schools worldwide, teaching children from kindergarten through high school how to recognize and celebrate the hidden talents of their peers. Sarah Harrison herself had become a remarkable young woman, fluent in 6 languages, accomplished in both computer science and violin, and possessed of her mother's gift for seeing potential in unexpected places. But more importantly, she had grown up understanding that her role was not to be extraordinary for its own sake, but to help others discover their own extraordinary nature. Mom, Sarah had told Elena the night before the UN speech, I want to work at the Institute when I graduate. Not because I'm your daughter, but because I want to make sure no one ever feels invisible the way you did. Elena had smiled, recognizing in her daughter the completion of a circle that had begun with pain and had transformed into purpose. Sarah would carry the mission forward to the next generation, ensuring that the lessons learned from one couple's failed marriage would continue protecting humanity from its own blindness. The Global Recognition Institute would eventually operate in 1950 countries, train over 100 million educators, and fundamentally alter how human beings approached relationships, hiring, education, and leadership. Children who graduated from Sarah Protocol schools showed dramatically higher rates of innovation, collaboration, and emotional intelligence. Marriages in communities with institute programs had divorce rates 60% lower than the global average. But perhaps the most profound change was unmeasurable: the gradual shift in human consciousness toward the assumption that everyone they met might be harboring extraordinary capabilities. Store clerks were discovered to be published poets. Janitors revealed themselves as brilliant inventors. Quiet spouses turned out to be running humanitarian organizations, or writing novels, or developing breakthrough medical treatments. Elena's story had evolved beyond personal vindication into something approaching spiritual awakening for the human species. The woman who had been told she contributed nothing had contributed the foundational insight that would guide humanity's evolution toward a more perceptive, compassionate, and wise civilization. As Elena left the United Nations that day, she carried with her the knowledge that her deepest pain had become humanity's greatest gift. The marriage that had failed because one person couldn't see the other had taught 7 billion people how to see each other more clearly. Marcus's cruel words, spoken in ignorance and frustration 20 years earlier, had accidentally launched the most important social revolution in human history, a revolution based on the radical idea that everyone deserves to be truly seen, and that society's greatest treasures are often hidden in plain sight, waiting only for someone with the wisdom to look more carefully. The echo of that rainy night would reverberate through human consciousness forever, a permanent reminder that our greatest blindness is often toward those closest to us, and our greatest opportunity is always to see others more completely than we ever thought possible. 25 years after their divorce, Marcus Rodriguez stood nervously outside the Vanguard Tech global headquarters in Denver, holding an invitation that had arrived unexpectedly 3 weeks earlier. The building before him stretched 60 stories into the Colorado sky, a monument to everything he had failed to see in the woman he'd once shared a bed with. The invitation was simple: personal request from Elena Vasquez Harrison to attend the 25th anniversary celebration of Vanguard Tech Solutions. Your presence would be meaningful. At 57, Marcus carried himself differently than the angry, frustrated man who had demanded his wife contribute something real all those years ago. His hair was now completely gray, his face lined with the wisdom that comes from genuinely understanding your mistake. He had spent a quarter-century teaching others about the cost of blindness to worth, becoming one of the most sought-after speakers on relationship recognition and personal growth. The lobby of Vanguard Tech was like stepping into the future. Holographic displays showed real-time cybersecurity operations protecting infrastructure across 7 continents, while walls displayed photos of the company's 25,000 employees from around the world. But what struck Marcus most was a simple plaque near the entrance, dedicated to everyone whose potential was hidden in plain sight. Elena appeared from the executive elevator, and Marcus felt his breath catch. At 59, she radiated the kind of confidence that comes from having transformed personal pain into global purpose. Her silver hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a simple but obviously expensive dress that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. But it was her eyes that held Marcus transfixed. They carried no anger, no resentment, only a deep peace that suggested she had truly moved beyond their shared past. "Marcus," she said simply, extending her hand, "thank you for coming." "Elena," he replied, taking her hand and feeling the same electric connection that had first drawn them together 3 decades earlier. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. There's something I need to show you," Elena said, leading him to a private conference room overlooking the city. "Something that I think will interest you." The room's walls were covered with letters, emails, and photos, thousands of them. As Marcus looked closer, he realized they were all testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by what had become known as the Elena effect, the global movement toward recognizing hidden worth that had emerged from their story. "This is from a woman in Tokyo whose husband finally asked about her art after hearing our story," Elena explained, pointing to one letter. "This is from a teacher in Brazil who started really listening to his quiet students, and discovered 3 of them were mathematical geniuses. This is from a couple in Norway who avoided divorce by learning to see each other's actual contributions to their relationship." Marcus read letter after letter, each one a testament to how their private marital failure had somehow become a catalyst for human connection around the world. Marriages saved, talents discovered, potential unleashed, all because people had heard the story of a CEO whose husband didn't know what she did for a living. "There are over 100,000 letters," Elena continued, "from every continent, in dozens of languages, all from people who learned to see others more clearly because they heard about us." Marcus sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what their story had accomplished. "Elena, I need you to know something. I've spent 25 years trying to understand how I could have been so blind, not just to your success, but to you as a person." Elena sat across from him, her expression patient and kind. "What did you discover?" "That I was terrified of your brilliance," Marcus said quietly. "Even before I knew about Vanguard Tech, some part of me sensed that you were extraordinary. And instead of celebrating that, I tried to diminish it because I was afraid of what it meant about me." For the first time since he'd arrived, Elena's composure shifted slightly. "Go on." "I convinced myself that if you were successful, it meant I was a failure. I made your worth about my insecurity instead of about your actual value." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I spent 5 years married to the most remarkable person I'd ever met, and I wasted every day of it, trying to make you smaller so I could feel bigger." Elena nodded slowly. "That's exactly what happened. But here's what I've learned from teaching others about our story," Marcus continued. "My blindness to your worth wasn't just my loss,
It was the world's law. How many other brilliant people are being diminished by partners who are too insecure to celebrate their success? How many innovations? How many solutions to global problems? How many contributions to humanity are being stifled because someone can't handle their partner being extraordinary? Elena's eyes brightened with something that might have been pride. That's why I wanted you here today, Marcus, because you understand now what I always hoped you would understand. That this was never about us, it was about something much bigger. She walked to the window overlooking Denver's skyline. In 1 hour, I'm announcing my retirement from Vanguard Tech. I'm 59 years old, and I've spent 25 years building something that can run without me. But more importantly, I've spent 25 years learning that my greatest contribution wasn't the technology or the business success. Marcus joined her at the window. What was it? Was proving that when someone tries to make you invisible, you have two choices: accept it, or become so undeniably visible that you change how the world sees everyone else. Elena turned to face him directly. Marcus, your words that night, you contribute nothing. They freed me to contribute everything, not just to cybersecurity or business, but to the fundamental way humans recognize worth in each other. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Elena, not just for what I said, but for what I prevented you from being while we were married. You don't need to apologize anymore, Elena said gently. You've spent 25 years making amends by teaching others not to repeat your mistake. You've probably saved more marriages than most therapists. She handed him a folder. I have one final request. Marcus opened the folder to find documents establishing the Marcus Rodriguez Foundation for Recognition Education, a $500 million endowment to fund programs teaching relationship recognition skills in schools worldwide. I want you to run it, Elena said, not because I forgive you. Forgiveness happened years ago, but because you understand the cost of not seeing clearly better than anyone else alive. You've earned the right to teach this lesson. Marcus stared at the documents, speechless. Elena was offering him the chance to turn his greatest failure into his life's most meaningful work. Why? He finally asked. Elena smiled, and for a moment, Marcus saw a flash of the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Because sometimes the person who caused the wound is the only one who can truly heal it, and because our story isn't finished yet, it's just moving into its next chapter. As Marcus held the foundation documents, he understood that Elena had given him something far more valuable than forgiveness. She had given him the opportunity to transform his shame into service, his regret into recognition, his blindness into the ability to help others see clearly. Their marriage had failed spectacularly, but their story was becoming one of the great redemption narratives of the modern age. Proof that even our worst mistakes can become the foundation for extraordinary contributions to human understanding. As Elena and Marcus stood together in the conference room surrounded by 100,000 testimonials of transformed lives, the door opened quietly. Sarah Harrison, now 20 years old and a senior at MIT studying both computer science and social psychology, entered with the confident stride of someone who had grown up understanding her role in something much larger than herself. Mom, the board is ready for your announcement, Sarah said, then paused as she noticed Marcus. Her expression shifted to one of genuine curiosity rather than hostility. This was the man whose failure had inadvertently launched her mother's empire and in many ways had shaped Sarah's entire worldview about the importance of recognizing worth in others. Sarah, Elena said warmly, I'd like you to meet Marcus Rodriguez. Marcus, this is my daughter Sarah. Sarah extended her hand with the same confident bearing her mother displayed in boardrooms around the world. Mr. Rodriguez, I've wanted to meet you for years. Your story has been a foundational part of my education about human psychology and relationship dynamics. Marcus shook her hand, struck by how much Sarah resembled Elena at that age. The same intelligent eyes, the same quiet strength, but with an additional quality that came from being raised with absolute certainty about her own worth and potential. Sarah is graduating this spring with degrees in both computer science and social psychology, Elena explained. She's been developing what she calls the recognition protocol, a systematic approach to teaching recognition skills that goes beyond anything we've done before. Sarah's eyes lit up as she began explaining her research. Mr. Rodriguez, Your case study has been central to my thesis work. I've been studying the neurological patterns that prevent people from recognizing potential in those closest to them. It turns out there's actually a cognitive bias called familiarity blindness. The more time we spend with someone, the more likely we are to stop noticing their evolving capability. Marcus listened with fascination as Sarah described her research into the psychological mechanisms that had driven his behavior 25 years early. She spoke with the same precision and passion that Elena brought to cybersecurity, but with an additional dimension of empathy that suggested she understood human failure as a systems problem rather than a moral failing. The recognition protocol I've developed, Sarah continued, teaches people specific exercises to counteract familiarity blindness, daily appreciation practices, curiosity protocols, assumption challenging technique. We've tested it with over 500 couples and the results are remarkable. 90% improvement in partner satisfaction, 75% increase in mutual support for individual goals. Elena watched her daughter with obvious pride, but also with the satisfaction of someone seeing their life's work evolve beyond what they could have imagined. Sarah is planning to dedicate her career to scaling these protocols globally. She wants to make recognition skills as fundamental to education as reading and mathematics. There's something else, Sarah said, looking between her mother and Marcus with the intensity of someone about to share a significant revelation. I've been studying families where one parent shows extraordinary achievement that the other parent doesn't recognize. The pattern repeats across generations. Children who grow up in households where achievement is dismissed or diminished are 60% more likely to either underachieve themselves or to dismiss others' achievements in their own relationships. Marcus felt the weight of this revelation. You're saying that my blindness to your mother's worth could have affected not just our marriage, but potentially generations of relationships. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. But here's the fascinating part. When we track families where this pattern was broken, where someone like you learned to recognize worth and taught those skills to others, the positive effects also compound across generations. Children who grow up with parents who truly see each other become adults who are exceptionally good at recognizing potential in their own partners, children, and colleagues. Elena moved to stand beside her daughter, and Marcus could see the completion of a circle that had begun with pain and had transformed into purpose. Sarah, tell him about the Global Recognition Project. Sarah's expression became even more focused. Miss Rodriguez, if you accept leadership of the Marcus Rodriguez Foundation, you'll be working with me to implement recognition education in every school system worldwide. We're not just talking about preventing relationship failures. We're talking about fundamentally upgrading human civilization's ability to identify and develop talent. She pulled up a holographic display showing global statistics. Currently, we estimate that approximately 40% of human potential goes unrecognized and undeveloped due to familiarity blindness, unconscious bias, and systematic failures of recognition. If we could reduce that to 20% through universal recognition education, the implications would be staggering. Breakthrough innovations that never happen, leadership that never emerges, solutions to global problems that remain undiscovered. Marcus stared at the data, understanding for the first time the true scope of what his personal failure had revealed about human nature. You're saying that what happened between your mother and me wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a symptom of a species-wide cognitive limitation. Precisely, Sarah said. And you've spent 25 years developing expertise in how to overcome that limitation. You're not just qualified to lead this work, you're uniquely qualified because you understand both the cost of failure and the pathway to recognition. Elena placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus, our divorce wasn't the end of our story, it was the beginning of something we never could have imagined. Sarah represents the next evolution of what we learned from our failure. Sarah nodded. Miss Rodriguez, I grew up knowing that my parents' marriage failed because one person couldn't see the other's worth, but I also grew up knowing that their failure became the foundation for helping millions of people see each other more clearly. I want to spend my life ensuring that future children grow up in a world where being unseen is impossible. Marcus looked at this remarkable young woman who had inherited not just her mother's brilliance, but also the wisdom that had emerged from his mistakes. What would you need from your story? Sarah said simply. your understanding of what blindness costs, your credibility with people who have made similar mistakes, and your commitment to ensuring that what happened to you and Mom never happens to anyone else. Elena smiled. Sarah has already been accepted to Harvard's joint PhD program in psychology and public policy. She plans to spend the next 5 years developing the theoretical framework for global recognition education, then another 5 years implementing it worldwide. By the time I'm 30, Sarah added, I want every child on Earth to graduate from school with recognition skills as fundamental as literacy. I want every marriage to be built on genuine seeing rather than assumption. I want every workplace to be able to identify and develop talent regardless of background or presentation. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the sense that his life's greatest failure was about to become the foundation for humanity's greatest success. When do we start? Sarah grinned. And in that smile Marcus saw not just Elena's determination, but also the possibility of a world where his blindness had been transformed into universal sight. We start today, Sarah said. The future is waiting for us to teach it how to see.
3 years later, Sarah Harrison stood before the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, addressing an audience of presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, and Nobel laureates. At 23, she had already become the youngest person ever to address the forum's main assembly, but her youth was overshadowed by the revolutionary results of the Global Recognition Project's pilot programs. Distinguished leaders, Sarah began, her voice carrying the same confident authority that had characterized both her mother and, in his transformed state, Marcus Rodriguez. 3 years ago, we implemented recognition protocol education in 10,000 schools across 50 countries. Today, I'm here to share results that exceed our most optimistic projections. The massive screen behind her displayed data that would reshape educational policy worldwide. Students who had received just 2 years of recognition protocol training showed 200% improvement in collaborative problem solving, 150% increase in innovation metrics, and 300% improvement in identifying and developing peer talents. But the most stunning statistic was yet to come. In communities where recognition protocol education reached 60% of households, Sarah continued, we observed a phenomenon we've termed recognition cascade, a spontaneous cultural shift where recognizing hidden potential became the social norm rather than the exception. From the audience, Elena watched her daughter with profound pride. Now retired from Vanguard Tech but serving as an advisor to the Global Recognition Project, Elena had spent the past 3 years watching Sarah transform theoretical frameworks into practical tools that were literally changing human civilization. The recognition protocol had evolved into a comprehensive system that could be adapted for any culture, any age group, any context where humans needed to see each other more clearly. Marcus, now 60 and the director of the Marcus Rodriguez Foundation for Recognition Education, sat in the front row taking notes. His foundation had become the implementing arm of Sarah's research, establishing recognition centers in over 100 countries. Marcus had discovered that his decades of teaching relationship recognition skills made him uniquely qualified to train others, and his personal story continued to resonate with audiences around the world. The recognition cascade effect has produced outcomes we never anticipated, Sarah continued, clicking to a new slide showing global statistics. Cities with high recognition protocol adoption have seen 40% reductions in domestic violence, 50% decreases in workplace discrimination, and 60% improvements in educational achievement among traditionally underperforming demographics. The audience stirred with excitement. These weren't just academic improvements, they were solutions to some of humanity's most persistent social problems. But perhaps most remarkably, Sarah said, we've documented over 50,000 cases of hidden genius discovery, individuals whose extraordinary capabilities were recognized and developed only after their communities learned recognition protocol skills. We've identified brilliant scientists working as janitors, gifted artists hidden in corporate offices, and innovative entrepreneurs overlooked by traditional hiring practices. Maria Santos, the same woman who had received Elena's first recognition scholarship years earlier. Maria now ran a biotech company that had developed a revolutionary cancer treatment, but she spoke directly to the camera about how recognition protocol training in her community had helped her parents finally understand and support her scientific ambition. "This is what recognition looks like in action," Sarah explained. "Dr. Santos always had the potential to revolutionize cancer treatment. Recognition protocol education simply ensured that potential was seen, supported, and developed rather than dismissed or overlooked." The video shifted to testimonials from around the world. A previously quiet student in Bangladesh, who became a math prodigy when teachers learned to recognize different learning styles. A Japanese businessman whose wife's hidden artistic genius was finally acknowledged, leading to a museum career. An American couple whose marriage was saved when they learned to truly see each other's daily contributions. "The Global Recognition Project has confirmed our central hypothesis," Sarah concluded. "Human potential is not scarce. Recognition of that potential is scarce. When we solve the recognition problem, we unlock capabilities that have always existed but remained invisible." After the presentation, Sarah was approached by UNESCO's Director General, who announced that recognition protocol education would be formally adopted as part of UNESCO's global curriculum standards. The European Union pledged $2 billion toward implementation across all member nations. The African Union committed to making recognition protocol training mandatory for all government officials. But the most significant moment came when the Secretary General of the United Nations announced the establishment of Recognition Day, an annual global observance dedicated to seeing and celebrating the hidden potential in everyone around us. "Today marks a turning point in human civilization," the Secretary General declared. "We are witnessing the beginning of the recognition age, an era where humanity's greatest resource, its own potential, will finally be fully utilized." That evening, Elena, Sarah, and Marcus gathered for a private dinner in Davos. 3 generations of a story that had begun with pain and had transformed into global healing. The restaurant overlooked the Swiss Alps, and the symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. They had climbed to heights that none of them could have imagined when their journey began. 28 years ago, Elena said, raising her glass, "Marcus told me I contributed nothing to our marriage. Tonight, the United Nations is implementing programs based on our story in 1950 countries." Marcus smiled, no longer carrying the weight of shame, but instead the satisfaction of redemption earned through service. "I spent 5 years blind to your worth, and you've spent 28 years teaching the world to see clearly." Sarah looked between her mother and the man whose failure had become her life's mission. "You know what's remarkable? We've proven that our worst human tendencies, jealousy, insecurity, fear of others' success, can be transformed into our greatest strengths when we understand them as problems to be solved rather than character flaws to be accepted." Elena nodded. "The recognition age isn't about perfecting human nature. It's about giving people the tools to overcome their natural limitations. And," Marcus added, "it's about proving that no failure is too great to become the foundation for extraordinary success if you're willing to learn from it." As they sat together overlooking the mountains, the 3 of them represented something unprecedented in human history, a personal tragedy that had been transformed into species-wide evolution. Their story had become humanity's story, proof that recognition could be taught, blindness could be overcome, and everyone's potential could be seen and developed. The recognition age had officially begun, and it all traced back to a rainy night in Denver when a frustrated husband told his wife she contributed nothing. That cruel moment had become the seed of humanity's greatest awakening to its own extraordinary nature. The future would remember this, not as the story of one couple's failed marriage, but as the beginning of the era when humanity finally learned to see itself clearly. 10 years after the World Economic Forum announcement, Sarah Harrison Chen stood in the same Pentagon briefing room where her mother had once coordinated responses to cyber attacks. But now, at 33, Sarah was addressing a very different kind of security concern, the systematic elimination of humanity's most persistent threat, its own blindness to potential. "General Morrison, Secretary Chen, distinguished colleagues," Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent a decade transforming human civilization. "I'm here to brief you on the Recognition Age Progress Report, marking 15 years since global implementation began. The holographic displays around the room showed statistics that would have seemed impossible just 2 decades earlier. Global innovation rates had increased by 4. Economic inequality had dropped by 60% as previously overlooked talents were systematically identified and developed. But most remarkably, mental health metrics showed a 250% improvement worldwide as people increasingly felt seen, valued, and understood. The recognition cascade effect has exceeded all projections, Sarah continued. We now estimate that 85% of human potential is being actively recognized and developed, compared to 60% before recognition protocol implementation. This represents the largest increase in utilized human capability in recorded history. In the audience, Elena, now 69, watched her daughter with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed their deepest pain transform into humanity's greatest gift. Beside her sat Marcus, now 70, whose foundation had trained over 100 million recognition educators worldwide. The man who had once been blind to his wife's worth had become instrumental in teaching billions of people to see clearly. Sarah clicked to a slide showing global education metrics. Every child born in the last 10 years has received recognition protocol education from birth. These children, what we call generation recognition, display cognitive and emotional capabilities that represent a new baseline for human potential. They identify hidden talents in others 500% more effectively than previous generations, and show virtually no unconscious bias in their recognition patterns. The implications were staggering. Humanity was literally evolving its capacity for mutual recognition, creating a species that could see and develop its own potential with unprecedented clarity. But perhaps most significantly, Sarah continued, we've documented the emergence of what we term recognition intuition, the ability to instantly perceive hidden capabilities in others. This skill, once rare and considered almost supernatural, is now being developed systematically in recognition protocol graduates. Sarah shared a video compilation of remarkable discoveries made possible by enhanced recognition abilities, a 7-year-old in Nigeria, who identified a math principle that revolutionized quantum computing, an elderly janitor in Sweden, whose insights into cleaning chemistry led to breakthrough environmental technologies, a shy teenager in India, whose pattern recognition abilities solved logistics problems that had puzzled experts for decades. These discoveries weren't accidents, Sarah explained. They were the predictable result of a world that has learned to look for potential everywhere and in everyone. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from David, now 75 and still her beloved husband, watching the brief. Remember when you just wanted to work from home without being criticized? Now you've changed how the entire species sees each other. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. Elena smiled, thinking about the journey from that rainy night 30 years ago to this moment when her daughter was documenting humanity's transformation. The woman who had been told she contributed nothing had ultimately contributed to the fundamental evolution of human consciousness. Sarah moved to her final slides, showing projections for the next generation. Based on current trends, we estimate that within 20 years unrecognized potential will become effectively extinct. Every human being will grow up in an environment designed to identify, celebrate, and develop their unique capabilities. She paused, letting the magnitude of this statement settle. We are witnessing the end of wasted human potential as a species-wide phenomenon. The Pentagon officials listened with rapt attention as Sarah outlined the security implications. Nations with higher recognition protocol adoption show dramatically improved stability, innovation, and cooperation. The old paradigm of competition for scarce resources is being replaced by collaboration to develop abundant human potential. After the briefing, the 3 generations gathered once again, this time in Elena's Arlington home overlooking the cemetery where so many service members were buried. The symbolism was profound. They sat in a place dedicated to honoring sacrifice, having transformed their own sacrifices into something that honored all human potential. 30 years, Elena said quietly, looking between Marcus and Sarah. 30 years since you told me I contributed nothing. Marcus shook his head in wonder. I keep trying to calculate the mathematics of it. One cruel sentence, spoken in anger and ignorance,
becoming the catalyst for the largest positive transformation in human history. Right now, at this moment, 2.3 billion children are receiving recognition protocol education, 47 million adults are enrolled in recognition training programs, 56 countries have made recognition skills mandatory for government employees, teachers and healthcare workers. She scrolled to another screen, and in the last 24 hours alone, recognition protocol implementations led to 47,000 new talent discoveries, 12,000 improved relationships, and 3,200 innovative solutions to local and global problems. Elena watched the numbers scroll by, each statistic representing lives transformed, potential unleashed, capabilities celebrated. "Do you think we've succeeded?" she asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Mom, I think we've proven something that no one believed possible 30 years ago, that human nature can evolve, not through genetic manipulation or technological enhancement, but through learning. We've taught our species to see itself more clearly." Marcus added, "And we've proven that our worst failures can become our greatest contributions, if we're willing to transform pain into purpose." As the sun set over Arlington, the three of them sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Washington, D.C. come alive in the distance. In offices and homes throughout the city, recognition-trained individuals were identifying potential, celebrating capabilities, and building the kind of world where being unseen was no longer possible. The recognition age had matured from revolutionary concept to accepted reality. Humanity had learned to see itself clearly, and the transformation was irreversible. Their story, from a marriage destroyed by blindness to a species enlightened by sight, had become the foundation myth of a new era in human evolution. Not evolution through biology, but evolution through consciousness. And it all began with a woman who was told she contributed nothing, who chose to contribute everything instead. 50 years after that rain-soaked evening in Denver, the world gathered to commemorate the first Global Recognition Day anniversary. Elena Vasquez Harrison, now 84 and in a wheelchair but with eyes still blazing with the intelligence that had once been invisible to her husband, sat in the place of honor at the United Nations Assembly. The woman who had been dismissed as contributing nothing was now being celebrated as the catalyst for humanity's greatest evolutionary leap. The Secretary General approached the podium with reverence, reserved for historical moments. "Today we honor not just Elena Vasquez Harrison, but the profound truth her story taught our species, that our capacity to see worth in others determines the fate of civilization itself." In the audience, Marcus Rodriguez, now 85 and using a walking cane, wiped tears from his eyes. His granddaughter sat beside him, a child who had grown up in a world where recognition was as natural as breathing, where being overlooked was a historical curiosity rather than a daily reality. Marcus had lived to see his greatest failure become humanity's greatest gift, and the weight of that transformation had given his final years a meaning he never could have imagined. Sarah Harrison Chen, now 48, and Director of Global Recognition Education, took the stage to deliver the commemorative address. Behind her, a massive display showed the current state of human civilization: global conflict down 90%, innovation up 600%, mental illness nearly eliminated, and a new generation of humans who possessed recognition abilities that previous generations would have considered miraculous. 50 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the hushed assembly, "My mother was told by her husband that she contributed nothing to their marriage." That sentence, 9 words spoken in anger and ignorance, became the spark that ignited humanity's recognition revolution. She paused, letting the magnitude of that transformation settle over the audience. Today, every child on Earth grows up knowing that every person they meet contains extraordinary potential waiting to be discovered. Today, unrecognized genius is extinct. Today, human potential is our most treasured and carefully cultivated resource. The display behind her shifted to show statistics that would have been impossible to imagine 50 years earlier. Global literacy at 99.7%, with traditional academic measures expanded to include recognition literacy, emotional intelligence, and potential identification skills. War had become virtually obsolete as nations competed to develop rather than destroy human capability. Economic systems had transformed from scarcity-based models to abundance paradigms built on unlimited human potential. But the most profound change, Sarah continued, isn't in our technology or our institutions, it's in our consciousness. We have become a species that assumes extraordinary capability in everyone we meet. We have evolved beyond the primitive blindness that once caused us to overlook the treasures hidden in plain sight. Elena listened with deep satisfaction, her mind drifting back to that night when Marcus had attacked her work. She thought about the journey from invisibility to global recognition, from personal pain to species transformation. The Marines had taught her that no mission was too difficult if you had the right strategy and never gave up. Her life had proven that even the most painful personal failures could become the foundation for humanity's greatest victories. Marcus was invited to the stage, walking slowly but steadily to the podium. At 85, he had become the most recognized expert on overcoming recognition blindness, his personal story serving as both warning and inspiration for billions of people. 50 years ago, Marcus said, his voice still strong despite his age, I committed what may have been the most costly act of blindness in human history. I looked at the most extraordinary woman I had ever known and saw nothing. The assembly listened in complete silence. I spent decades trying to understand how I could have been so blind. The answer is both simple and terrifying. I saw Elena through the lens of my own limitations, rather than her unlimited potential. I made her worth about my insecurity instead of her capability. Marcus looked out over the assembly of world leaders, all of whom had grown up learning recognition skills from childhood. The lesson our story teaches isn't just about marriage or relationship. It's about the fundamental choice every human faces every day. Will you see others through the lens of your own limitations? Or will you look for the extraordinary potential that exists in every person you encounter? He gestured toward Elena, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. Elena chose to transform my blindness into the world's sight. She took the cruelest assessment of her worth and used it to ensure that no one would ever be unseen again. Sarah returned to the podium for the final address. Today, we live in a world where Elena's response to being told she was worthless has become humanity's greatest treasure, the absolute commitment to seeing and developing every person's extraordinary potential. The display showed children around the world engaged in recognition training, couples using recognition protocols to deepen their relationships, employers discovering hidden genius in unexpected places, and communities celebrating capabilities that previous generations would have overlooked entirely. 50 years ago, one woman was told she contributed nothing. Today, because of her response to that cruelty, every human being on Earth contributes everything they're capable of giving. Elena was helped to the podium for the final moment. At 84, her voice was softer but still carried the authority that had once commanded Pentagon briefing. I was a Marine, Elena said simply. Marines are taught that you never leave anyone behind. When Marcus told me I contributed nothing, I realized that millions of people around the world were being left behind, not on battlefields, but in daily life, hidden by assumptions, overlooked by blindness, dismissed by fear. She looked out over the assembly with the same piercing gaze that had once identified insurgent patterns in Iraq. Our story proves that human consciousness can evolve, that our species can learn to see itself clearly, that no one, absolutely no one, has to remain invisible. Elena's final words would be remembered as long as human civilization endured. The greatest threat to humanity was never war, disease, or natural disaster. It was our blindness to our own extraordinary nature. The greatest victory humanity can achieve isn't conquering other worlds, it's learning to truly see the world we already have, and the remarkable people who inhabit it. As Elena finished speaking, something unprecedented happened. The entire United Nations Assembly, presidents, prime ministers, diplomats, from 1950 countries, stood in complete silence for 60 seconds. Not applause but profound recognition of a truth so fundamental it required reverence rather than celebration. In that silence, the echo of Marcus's words from 50 years earlier seemed to hang in the air. you contribute nothing. And humanity's response, built over 5 decades of recognition revolution, answered back with overwhelming evidence. Everyone contributes everything, if someone cares enough to see it. The recognition age was not just a chapter in human history, it had become human nature itself. And it all began with a woman who refused to accept someone else's definition of her worth, choosing instead to redefine how humanity sees worth itself. The greatest story ever told wasn't about gods or heroes or mythical beings. It was about an ordinary woman who proved that being truly seen is the most powerful force in the universe, and that once you teach a species to see clearly, blindness becomes extinct forever.
You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.